The moment you thought no one saw your endurance, heaven was watching. When you whispered prayers through clenched teeth, when tears soaked your pillow and silence answered your questions, God was not absent. He was examining your faith. This is not a random season you survived. This was a test, and you passed it. And now God says, "Anointed woman, watch me restore everything." You did not arrive here by accident. You were led here by obedience that cost you comfort. You were shaped here by waiting that stretched your patience. You were refined here by loss that tried to define you but failed. What you endured did not destroy you. It revealed you. It exposed the anointing that had been hidden beneath pressure. Pressure does not remove oil, it releases it. And now the oil is flowing. There are seasons in life when it feels like everything is happening in secret. Your pain, your prayers, your endurance. No one applauded you for staying faithful. No one noticed how many times you had to gather your strength just to get through another day. There were no witnesses when you cried alone. No recognition when you chose obedience instead of walking away. No affirmation when you kept trusting God despite unanswered questions. Yet this is the truth you must understand deeply. Heaven was watching the entire time. God often conducts his most important work away from public view. Before he ever rewards publicly, he examines privately. The test you were in was never meant to be validated by people, because people do not have the authority to promote you. God does. What felt like isolation was actually intentional separation. He was watching how you handled disappointment, how you responded to delay, how you spoke when things did not go your way. He was listening to the prayers you whispered when your strength was gone. Every moment mattered. There were times when you wondered if your faith was being wasted, if your obedience was unnecessary, if anyone would ever know what you sacrificed. But God does not forget faithfulness. He does not miss a single moment of surrender. The silence was not proof that nothing was happening. It was proof that something sacred was taking place beyond human visibility. You were tested in ways that could not be explained to others. You were tested emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You were tested when it would have been easier to give up, compromise, or turn bitter. You were tested when you had every excuse to walk away, and yet you stayed. That is why this test mattered so much, because it revealed who you truly were when no one was watching but God. God watches the heart more than the outcome. He watches how you trust him when there is no immediate reward. He watches how you remain obedient when obedience costs you comfort. He watches how you love even after being hurt. These hidden moments are where destiny is decided. The world celebrates results, but God celebrates faithfulness. The enemy wanted you to believe that because people did not see your struggle. It meant your struggle had no value. That lie almost made you quit. But the truth is, what is hidden is often what God values most. Seeds grow underground before they ever break the surface. Roots are formed in darkness before a tree can stand tall. If everything had happened publicly, you would have been praised too early and crushed by expectations you were not yet ready to carry. God protected you by keeping the test private. He allowed you to grow without pressure, to mature without distraction, to develop strength without comparison. He was shaping your character so that when promotion comes, it does not destroy you. He was building endurance so that when the spotlight turns on, you can stand without losing yourself. You may not have realized it at the time, but every delay was purposeful. Every closed door was strategic. Every unanswered prayer was part of the process. God was not ignoring you. He was preparing you. He was watching how you handled the waiting, because the waiting was shaping your capacity to handle what is coming next. Passing the test does not mean you never struggled. It means you never surrendered your faith. It means you kept showing up even when you were tired. It means you kept believing even when doubt whispered louder than hope. It means you stayed aligned with God even when obedience felt lonely. That is what heaven rewards. Now understand this clearly. Because the test was hidden, the restoration will be undeniable. What God does next will not need explanation. People will see the result without knowing the cost. They will witness the favor without understanding the process. They will admire the strength without knowing how many nights you almost gave up. And that is okay, because God knows. He saw every tear. He recorded every prayer. He honored every sacrifice. Nothing you endured was wasted. Nothing you lost was meaningless. Nothing you survived was accidental. The test is over, not because time passed, but because transformation occurred. When God says you passed, it is not based on performance, but on perseverance. It is not about perfection, but about faithfulness. And because heaven was watching, heaven is now responding. What comes next will make sense of everything you endured. The silence will give way to clarity. The waiting will give way to movement. The hidden season will give way to visible restoration. You were tested quietly so you could be trusted greatly. And now, as God begins to restore, remember this truth. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared. The season that felt heavy, intense, and unrelenting was not designed to destroy you. It was designed to reveal you. What you walked through applied pressure, and pressure always exposes what is truly inside. When life pressed you on every side, when expectations weighed heavily on your heart, when circumstances tried to suffocate your hope, something powerful happened beneath the surface. The anointing that God placed within you began to rise. Pressure has a way of revealing truth. It shows whether faith is shallow or rooted, whether trust is conditional or surrendered. What surprised you is that you did not fall apart the way you thought you would. You bent, you cried, you questioned, but you did not break. That alone is evidence that God had already deposited strength within you long before the pressure came. You were not surviving on your own power. You were standing on divine grace. There were moments when you felt like you were being crushed by responsibility, misunderstood by people, and stretched beyond your emotional limits. It felt unfair that you had to endure so much while others seemed to move forward with ease. But what you did not realize is that ease does not produce depth. Comfort does not activate calling. Pressure, on the other hand, forces what is hidden to come to the surface. And what surfaced in you was resilience, wisdom, patience, and spiritual authority. Oil is never extracted without pressure. It must be crushed, pressed, and refined before it can flow. In the same way, the anointing on your life could not remain dormant if you were going to step into the purpose God designed for you. What felt like excessive strain was actually divine activation. God allowed the pressure because he trusted what he had placed inside you. You may have expected the pressure to weaken your faith, but instead it deepened it. You prayed differently, you listened more closely, you depended on God more fully. When everything else was stripped away, your relationship with him remained. That is not weakness. That is spiritual maturity. That is the kind of faith that cannot be taught, only tested. People may have mistaken your quiet endurance for fragility. They did not see the strength it took to keep moving forward when motivation was gone. They did not see the courage it took to remain kind while being wounded, to remain faithful while being delayed, to remain hopeful while being disappointed. But God saw it all, and he calls it anointing. The pressure also revealed what could no longer stay. Old coping mechanisms stopped working. Old mindsets became uncomfortable. Old patterns no longer fit. That discomfort was not punishment, it was growth. God was expanding your capacity and refining your character. He was preparing you to carry more without losing yourself in the process. There were times when you felt exposed, vulnerable, and emotionally raw. But exposure is not always harmful. Sometimes it is necessary. God exposes what needs healing so it can be restored. He exposes what is limiting you so it can be removed. And through that exposure, your anointing became clearer, stronger, and more authentic. What emerged from the pressure was not a hardened heart, but a wiser one. Not bitterness, but discernment. Not fear, but boldness rooted in trust. That is how you know the pressure did not win. If the pressure had succeeded in breaking you, you would have lost your faith. Instead, you gained clarity. You gained depth. You gained spiritual authority. This is why the enemy fought you so intensely in that season. Pressure is often greatest just before purpose is revealed. The enemy recognized what was inside you before you did. He tried to suffocate your faith because he knew the anointing you carried would eventually bless others. But what was meant to crush you became the very thing that qualified you. Now you stand changed, not empty, not defeated, not broken, but revealed. You know God in a way you did not before. You trust him beyond circumstances. You recognize his voice in the midst of uncertainty. That awareness is part of your anointing. It was forged in pressure, refined through endurance, and strengthened by surrender. When God begins to elevate you, remember this season. Remember that you did not arrive here by accident. You were pressed, but you were also preserved. You were stretched, but you were also sustained. The pressure did not remove what God placed in you. It activated it. What flows from you now carries weight, wisdom, and authenticity. You no longer speak from theory, but from experience. You no longer trust blindly, but deeply. That is the mark of true anointing. Pressure revealed it, and now God will use it. The season that almost broke, you did not fail. It fulfilled its purpose. You were not crushed. You were revealed. Some of the most painful moments in your journey were not caused by failure, but by divine separation. What fell apart in your life did not do so randomly. It happened because certain people, places, habits, and expectations were never meant to walk with you into the next season God prepared for you. At the time, the loss felt unbearable. You questioned why something you prayed for, fought for, and invested in could end so abruptly. But what you didn't understand then is what you are beginning to see now. Not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things leave because they can no longer stay. God sees the full picture while we only see the present pain. He knows what will become a weight instead of a blessing. He knows what will limit your growth instead of supporting it. When he removes something from your life, it is often because it cannot handle the future he has planned for you. What feels like rejection is often protection. What feels like an ending is often a redirection. You may have begged God to fix certain relationships, to reopen certain doors, to restore certain situations exactly as they were. But God, in his wisdom, chose not to. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to let you remain connected to something that would eventually drain you, delay you, or derail you. Some connections were built for a season of survival, not a season of elevation. There were people who loved the version of you that was smaller, quieter, more accommodating. They were comfortable with you when you were doubting yourself, when you needed their approval, when you were willing to shrink to maintain peace. But as you grew, as your faith deepened, as your anointing became evident, those same connections became strained. The distance was not because you changed for the worse, it was because you changed for the better. God will never elevate you while allowing what cannot support your calling to remain attached. Elevation requires alignment, and alignment often requires separation. That separation hurts because attachment creates familiarity, and familiarity feels safe, but safe does not always mean suitable. God removed what was familiar so he could introduce what was faithful. What fell apart also exposed truth. It revealed motives, intentions, and limitations that were hidden beneath comfort. When things were easy, dysfunction could hide, but under pressure, what was unhealthy became visible. That visibility was painful, but it was necessary. God was protecting you from investing further into what could never fully support who you are becoming. You did not imagine the shift. You did not overreact. You did not fail because something ended. The ending was part of the assignment. God was closing chapters that could not continue into the next book. And while you mourned the loss, God was already preparing replacement, not always of the same kind, but of greater alignment. What makes this truth difficult is that some of what fell apart looked good. It wasn't always toxic on the surface. Some things simply became incompatible with your growth. God is not obligated to preserve what no longer fits his purpose. He is committed to fulfilling his promise, even if it means removing what you were attached to. You may still feel the ache of what you lost. That ache does not mean the separation was wrong. It means the attachment was real. God is not offended by your grief. He understands it. But he also invites you to trust that what he removed was never meant to define your future. The future requires freedom, not familiarity. Now, as you look back, you may begin to notice something subtle but powerful. Your peace has increased, even though certain things are missing. Your clarity has improved, even though some relationships ended. Your strength has grown, even though you lost support you once depended on. That is evidence that what fell apart was not holding you up. It was holding you back. God does not dismantle your life to harm you. He dismantles what is unstable so he can build something lasting. He removes what cannot grow with you so he can surround you with what will. And even when the removal feels abrupt, it is guided by love, not cruelty. The next season requires more from you, and it will also give more to you. But you could not step into it carrying what belonged to the past. God was clearing the path, lightening the load, and protecting your purpose. What fell apart had already completed its assignment. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not starting over from nothing. You are moving forward unburdened. And D, as painful as the separation was, it made room for alignment, restoration, and growth. What left had to leave. And what is coming will fit you better than what you lost ever could. There were moments when you moved forward without understanding why God was asking you to take that step. You obeyed while your mind was full of questions and your heart was heavy with uncertainty. Nothing around you confirmed that you were making the right decision, and yet something within you would not let you turn back. That obedience, born in confusion, was not weakness. It was faith at its purest form. God rarely explains everything before he asks for obedience. If he did, it would require logic instead of trust. You were not meant to understand the whole picture. You were meant to trust the one who sees it. When you said yes without clarity, when you stayed faithful without reassurance, when you followed God even though the outcome was unclear, you demonstrated a level of surrender that qualifies you for restoration. Confusion is often the environment where obedience proves its authenticity. Anyone can obey when the path is clear, when the reward is visible, and when the outcome is guaranteed. But obedience in uncertainty costs something. It costs comfort, control, and sometimes credibility. You risk being misunderstood, you risk disappointment, you risk feeling foolish, yet you obeyed anyway. There were voices around you offering advice that sounded reasonable but conflicted with what God had spoken to your spirit. There were moments when walking away would have been easier than standing firm. But you chose alignment over approval. You chose obedience over explanation. And heaven took note of every time you stayed true to what God asked, even when it isolated you, that obedience refined your faith. It forced you to rely on God rather than outcomes. It taught you how to walk without needing constant confirmation. It strengthened your spiritual discernment. You learned how to hear God even when circumstances were loud and contradictory. That growth was not accidental. It was preparation. Restoration is never given to those who demand clarity before obedience. It is released to those who trust God enough to move without seeing the entire path. Your willingness to obey without knowing how things would turn out demonstrated that your faith was rooted in relationship, not results. God restores what is entrusted to him, and you entrusted your uncertainty, your fears, and your future into his hands. You may have felt foolish at times for holding on when others let go. You may have questioned whether your obedience was worth the emotional toll. But obedience always carries a hidden reward. Even when it looks like nothing is happening, something is being established in the spirit. God was building credibility into your faith, stability into your character, and authority into your calling. The restoration coming into your life is not random. It is not delayed luck or sudden opportunity. It is a direct response to surrendered obedience. God restores because he can trust you with what he gives. He knows you will not idolize the blessing. He knows you will not compromise your values to keep it. He knows you will remain aligned even when pressure returns. Obedience in confusion also taught you patience. You learned to wait without bitterness, to trust without forcing outcomes, to rest without controlling the process. Those lessons are essential for sustaining restoration. Without them, restored blessings would overwhelm you. With them, restoration becomes a testimony rather than a trial. You may not have realized it, but every time you obeyed despite fear, you were depositing faith into your future. Every step taken in trust laid a foundation on for what God is now building. Restoration stands on the shoulders of obedience. What God is about to return to you is supported by the faith you demonstrated when you had nothing but His word to hold on to. Now, as clarity begins to replace confusion, you will see how every obedient step mattered. You will understand why certain paths were taken and others were blocked. You will see how God guided you even when you felt unsure. And you will realize that obedience was not costing you, it was qualifying you. Restoration does not erase the memory of confusion. It redeems it. It turns uncertainty into understanding and faith into fulfillment. What you obeyed in the dark is about to be rewarded in the light. God never forgets obedience, especially when it required you to trust Him beyond your understanding. You obeyed without clarity, and now clarity is coming with restoration. There is a reason God did not simply give you back what you lost. If He had restored things exactly as they were, you would have returned to familiar patterns, familiar limitations, and familiar pain. God is not interested in rewinding your life. He is committed to realigning it. What He restores is never a copy of the past. It is an upgrade designed to carry the weight of your future. When loss first entered your story, it felt like something precious was taken from you. You replayed memories, imagined different outcomes, and asked God why restoration couldn't look like reversal. But God saw what you could not see. He knew that what you lost, while meaningful, could not sustain the version of you He was forming. Restoration that merely returns you to what was would limit who you are becoming. God restores better because He restores with purpose. He does not rebuild broken foundations. He establishes stronger ones. What He is bringing into your life now carries greater stability, deeper alignment, and lasting impact. The past version served its purpose, but it was never meant to be permanent. God allows certain things to end so He can introduce what is mature enough to remain. You may still carry the expectation that restoration means getting back what was familiar. But familiarity is not the same as fulfillment. Familiarity often keeps us attached to comfort rather than calling. God removes what feels safe so He can give what is significant. The better He is restoring may challenge you at first, because it requires a higher level of responsibility and faith. What God restores now comes with wisdom you didn't have before. You have learned discernment through disappointment. You have gained strength through endurance. You have developed boundaries through loss. Those lessons prepare you to handle what is coming without repeating old mistakes. This restoration will not require you to lose yourself to maintain it. Better does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, steadily, and with peace instead of urgency. You may notice that what God is restoring does not create anxiety the way the old season did. It does not demand constant proving or striving. It fits, it flows, it feels aligned rather than forced. That peace is confirmation that this restoration is from God. You might find yourself grieving what you thought restoration would look like, even while receiving something greater. That does not mean you are ungrateful. It means you are human. God understands that letting go of expectations is part of healing. But once you fully embrace what He is restoring, you will see why the old could not return. God restores better because He values sustainability. What He gives now is meant to last. It is built on truth, not illusion. It is supported by maturity, not desperation. It is rooted in obedience, not emotion. This restoration does not depend on constant effort to keep it alive. It thrives because it is aligned with God's design. You are not being given a second chance to repeat the past. You are being given a new opportunity to live differently. This restoration reflects the growth you went through during the test. You now recognize red flags sooner. You trust God more deeply. You value peace more than appearance. That transformation is why God can trust you with better. There was a time when you would have begged for what you lost. Now God is offering what you once prayed for without realizing it needed to look different. The loss changed your prayers. The waiting refined your desires. And the restoration will exceed your earlier expectations because your capacity is expanded. God's version of better may stretch you, but it will not drain you. It may challenge you, but it will not confuse you. It may require faith, but it will not steal your peace. What he restores now honors who you are now, not who you used to be. When you look back, you will see that what you thought you needed was only a shadow of what God planned to give. You will understand that returning to the old would have been settling. God did not restore back because back was beneath the calling on your life. This is not replacement. It is redemption, not repetition, but refinement. God restores better because he loves you too much to give you less than what your growth can now sustain. What is coming will make sense of what was lost. Before anything around you changes, God always begins his work within you. Outer breakthroughs are visible, but inner restoration is essential. If God were to restore relationships, opportunities, or resources without first restoring your heart, your peace, and your identity, the blessing would eventually overwhelm you. That is why this season has focused so deeply on what is happening inside you. Rather than what is happening around you, there were moments when you expected God to fix your situation, but instead he addressed your perspective. You prayed for doors to open, yet God worked on your patience. You asked for relief, but he strengthened your discernment. At times it felt like God was ignoring the problem, when in reality he was healing the root. What you thought was delay was divine prioritization. Inner restoration begins with peace. God had to restore your peace because anxiety had become familiar. You learned how to function while worried, how to pray while fearful, how to hope while bracing for disappointment. God did not want peace to be something you visited occasionally. He wanted it to become your foundation. Without restored peace, any external blessing would have felt fragile and unstable. God also restored your identity. There was a season when your worth was tied to outcomes, to being chosen, to being validated by people. When those things were removed, it felt like you lost yourself. But what actually happened was a revelation. You discovered who you are without applause, without approval, without constant affirmation. That identity is unshakable. It cannot be taken by circumstances or opinions. As your identity was restored, your confidence changed. Not the loud, attention-seeking kind, but a quiet assurance rooted in trust. You no longer needed to prove yourself. You no longer chased what once drained you. You learned the power of walking away without explanation. That confidence is a sign of inner restoration at work. God also healed emotional wounds you learned to tolerate. Pain that you once ignored began to surface, not to harm you, but to be healed. Old disappointments, unspoken grief, and unresolved betrayal came to the surface because they could not go with you into the next season. God does not build on broken foundations. He heals before he elevates. There were times when facing those inner wounds felt harder than enduring external struggles. You would have preferred visible change over internal confrontation. But God knew that unhealed pain would sabotage future blessings. Inner restoration is protection disguised as process. Through this work, God refined your priorities. What once seemed urgent lost its grip. What once consumed your energy no longer controlled you. You began to value peace over performance, alignment over approval, and purpose over popularity. This shift was not accidental. It was preparation. As inner restoration progressed, your prayers changed. You stopped begging and started trusting. You stopped demanding timelines and started seeking alignment. You learned how to surrender without fear. That transformation in prayer reveals maturity. God responds to prayers that come from rest, not desperation. Inner restoration also sharpened your discernment. You now recognize what drains you and what strengthens you. You sense when something is off before it collapses. You no longer ignore red flags to preserve comfort. This awareness is essential for sustaining what God is about to release. Now, understand this. The reason external restoration has not fully manifested yet is not because God is withholding. It is because he is finishing his work within you. Once inner stability is established, outer restoration follows naturally. When the inside is strong, the outside can grow without causing collapse. When God restores externally, after restoring internally, the blessing feels different. It does not create fear of loss. It does not demand constant maintenance. It does not steal your sleep. Instead, it enhances your life rather than consuming it. You enjoy it without idolizing it. You are closer to visible restoration than you realize because inner restoration has already taken place. You are calmer, stronger, more grounded, more discerning, more aligned. Those are not small changes. They are signs that God has prepared you for what is coming. The world celebrates what is seen, but heaven celebrates what is healed. God restored your heart so that when he restores your life, you will be able to stand in it with peace, gratitude, and stability. Inner restoration was not the delay, it was the doorway. Stepping into a new season with God always requires leaving something behind. Expansion cannot happen if you insist on carrying what no longer fits. As God began restoring you, he also began confronting old mindsets that once helped you survive but can no longer sustain where he is taking you. What protected you in past seasons will restrict you in the next if you refuse to release it. There was a time when survival thinking was necessary. You learned how to guard yourself, how to stay alert, how to anticipate disappointment. Those habits kept you functioning during uncertainty and pain. But now, God is calling you out of survival mode and into stewardship. What once felt wise now feels heavy because it no longer belongs to this season. Old mindsets are subtle. They don't always look negative. Some disguise themselves as caution, independence, or self-reliance. You may tell yourself that you're just being careful, but deep down, it is fear trying to stay in control. God is not removing these patterns to expose you. He is removing them to expand you. Expansion requires trust. You cannot grow while constantly bracing for loss. You cannot receive restoration while expecting it to be taken away. God is teaching you how to live open-handed instead of closed-fisted. What you hold too tightly can never multiply. Release creates room for increase. There were beliefs you formed during painful seasons that once made sense. You told yourself no, to hope too much, not to expect too much, not to trust too deeply. Those beliefs helped you survive disappointment, but they also limited joy. God is gently challenging those inner agreements, not to shame you, but to free you. Releasing old mindsets is uncomfortable because it requires vulnerability. It means allowing yourself to believe again, to expect again, to trust again. Fear resists this process because fear thrives on familiarity, but faith thrives on surrender. God is asking you to choose faith over familiarity. You may notice resistance rising within you as God expands your capacity. You might feel stretched emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. This is not regression, it is growth. Just as muscles ache when they expand, your mind will resist when it is asked to think differently. But this discomfort is temporary. What is permanent is the freedom that follows. God is also asking you to release people-pleasing tendencies. Old mindsets taught you to keep the peace at the cost of your own well-being. But expansion requires boundaries. You can no longer shrink to make others comfortable. The restored version of you must be honest, aligned, and firm in your convictions. Letting go of old thinking does not mean forgetting where you came from. It means refusing to live there. You honor your past by growing beyond it, not by staying bound to it. God does not heal you so you can return to survival. He heals you so you can thrive. As you release old mindsets, you will notice a shift in how you respond to challenges. You will pause instead of panic. You will pray instead of assume. You will trust instead of control. These are signs of expansion. They show that your inner world is making space for greater responsibility and greater blessing. Expansion also changes how you see yourself. You no longer identify as someone who barely made it. You begin to see yourself as someone entrusted with purpose. That identity shift is essential. You cannot carry expanded influence with a diminished self-view. God is not rushing this process because rushed expansion leads to collapse. He is patiently teaching you how to hold more without fear. He is training your mind to support the weight of restoration. Every old mindset released creates room for new vision, new peace, and new confidence. What you are letting go of now is not being taken from you. It is being replaced. God never removes without intending to restore. The new mindset he is forming in you is rooted in trust, peace, and authority. It allows you to move forward without constantly looking back. This release is part of alignment. Alignment positions you correctly for elevation. You cannot walk into expanded blessing with a contracted mindset. God is aligning your thoughts with your future so that when restoration fully manifests, you will be ready to receive it without fear. Let go of what helped you survive. Embrace what will help you grow. There comes a moment when survival ends and preparation is revealed. For a long time, you thought you were just trying to make it through. You believed your only victory was that you didn't quit. But now God is opening your eyes to a deeper truth. You were never merely surviving. You were being prepared. Every tear, every delay, every silent battle was shaping you into someone capable of carrying what is coming next. Survival mode taught you endurance, but preparation taught you discernment. You learned how to recognize God's voice in the quiet, how to depend on him when nothing else was reliable, how to stand when there was no applause. These lessons were not accidental. God was training you in obscurity so that when visibility comes, you are not shaken by it. You are being prepared for stability, not just success. There were asons when you felt weak, but weakness was not the truth. It was humility being formed. God allowed you to reach the end of yourself so you would learn to rely on him fully. That reliance is now one of your greatest strengths. You know where your help comes from. You know what sustains you. That knowledge cannot be taught. It can only be learned through experience. Preparation also refined your motives. You no longer desire things just to prove something or fill a void. You want alignment more than attention. You want peace more than applause. You want purpose more than position. That shift did not happen overnight. It happened through disappointment, waiting, and unanswered prayers. God was purifying your heart so that when blessing arrives, it does not replace him. You were prepared through endurance. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You trusted when doubting would have been justified. You kept moving forward when progress felt invisible. That perseverance built spiritual stamina. Now you are not easily shaken by delay or discouraged by resistance. You understand that God works beyond what you can see. You were also prepared through loss. What left your life created room. At the time, it felt like emptiness. Now you see it as capacity. God removed what was temporary so he could entrust you with what is lasting. Preparation often looks like subtraction before multiplication. There was a version of you that only knew how to react. Now you know how to respond. There was a version of you that panicked under pressure. Now you pause and pray. There was a version of you that needed constant reassurance. Now you move with quiet confidence. These are signs that preparation has done its work. You are no longer defined by what you went through. You are defined by what you became through it. The fear that once controlled you has lost its authority. The doubt that once paralyzed you no longer has the same voice. The pain that once shaped your decisions has been healed. That is preparation bearing fruit. God does not prepare people for nothing. He prepares them for responsibility, influence, and impact. What you are stepping into will require wisdom, restraint, and humility, qualities you developed in hidden places. You are not stepping into this next season untested or unqualified. You have been trained by endurance and refined by faith. The enemy tried to convince you that the struggle meant you were failing. In reality, the struggle meant you were being strengthened. You were not falling behind, you were being equipped. Everything that once felt like it slowed you down was actually building the foundation you now stand on. Now you are ready to move forward without dragging the past behind you. You are ready to receive without fear. You are ready to walk in purpose without shrinking. You are ready to live from overflow instead of exhaustion. Preparation has replaced survival. What comes next will feel different because you are different. You are grounded, you are steady, you are aware of God's presence in a way you weren't before. That awareness is protection. That maturity is power. You did not just make it through, you were prepared for what is ahead. This is the moment where you stop looking back at what almost broke you and start honoring what it built in you. The season of survival is over. The season of preparation has done its work. Now you step forward with clarity, strength, and trust. What God is releasing next is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to flow through you. You are ready because God made you ready. Walk forward with confidence. The woman who endured is now equipped